Brandon here, time to set of SexxxPerTease. His question is, when do relationship expectations become unrealistic? This is a lot of things that people, I do feel like, have these like lists of what they want in a perfect partner. I've been guilty of it in the past before as well, and I feel like as you get older, you're supposed to mature and realize like some of these things I want ideally in a partner. It's like, of course that's ideal, but it's just like it's not most likely going to happen. Like the reality is no one's ever going to be your 100% perfect person. Like we all come from different histories, baggage, etc. We've all been raised differently. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different perspectives. Like we have been shaped by our life experiences. So it's like no one's going to be your perfect person that you imagined to be your perfect partner, but you just have to think of like what things are important and what things are not important, especially when it comes to ultimately the biggest thing you really need is, do I love them? Do they love me? Do they want to build a life with me? Etc. But of course there's way more factors that come into play than that. Of course there's always things like money, education, family relationships, friendships, past dating histories, etc. And I feel like a lot of people, I think the things that usually are the most unrealistic are when they think of like the perfect appearance or like the perfect like money their future partner is gonna have. So I kind of just feel like it's unrealistic if you think you're gonna find your perfect man that's also rich, successful, also has enough time for you, enough time for the relationship, like etc. It's just like people get unrealistic when they're like gold digging or thinking like he's gonna have like a master's degree, make at least 100K a year, he's gonna have his own car, it better be like a BMW, Mercedes, it better be like 6'3" and like 200 something pounds or whatever. It's just kind of like when you're imagining someone that I guess is like perfect, you know it's like not realistic, but I also kind of feel like you're allowed to have standards to a point of like I feel like a perfect height and weight, like if you're like, I think you should at least have a range that you're open to. Like some people, their standards are just way too like narrow and specific, and I kind of just feel like I at least like my standards are I prefer someone that is at least like my size or bigger. Like honestly, my ideal preference is someone that's bigger than me, like weighs more, taller than me. But I feel like at the bare minimum, like I'll go as low as like an inch shorter or maybe like 10 to 20 pounds less. But I feel like ideally, like I do usually end up with guys that are like my type, which are bigger than me. But I still kind of feel like you need to at least be open to someone that might not exactly meet your minimum requirement. But I kind of feel like you're allowed to know what you're attracted to, but if your type that you're looking for isn't into you, or you rarely ever give anyone that type, that's when you kind of know it's unrealistic. Like if you're not even finding anyone that matches what your perfect mate or what your standards you claim to be are, it's unrealistic. Like if you are looking for like a fucking supermodel and you're ugly, like you should know like you're not gonna end up with someone like that unless you are very rich. And even then I'm sure you're not their perfect match, but they can tolerate you for the money. So I kind of feel like you have to know like goods and services and trade and barter, like what you lack is probably going to factor into what other people want as well. Like you're not going to be someone else's perfect type as well, especially with like whatever baggage you have. Like if you don't want someone that has kids, like then I feel like that's not unrealistic. I feel like that's perfectly acceptable, but sometimes you might find someone and they might have a kid, and it's just about being open to people that aren't exactly your ideal match. But I also kind of feel like you don't have to be open to certain things as well. Like if you're not pause friendly, you don't have to date someone pause, even though it's like many in the gay community want to drag you or say it's wrong that you can't, or you can only be interested in someone else that's negative if you're negative. But I also just kind of feel like that's your preference. And I feel like when things are like preferences and requirements are also a thing that people get like confused. Because like a preference is like you know what you want, but you're also open to someone that might not fully align with that. But a requirement is like, if you don't have this, I don't want you, I'm not going to talk to you, you're not worth my time, etc. And we all have preferences, we all have requirements, etc. I feel like the biggest ones that are like the most ridiculous are like when it comes down to money or like someone's car, financial status. Because I feel like that's all superficial. Like if you don't even have that, then you shouldn't even be requiring that. And I also kind of feel like even if you do have that, the likelihood of finding someone else on your level when you do get to a certain amount of like wealth and education and status, it's going to be rare. Like, your dating options are already very limited. So then if you want to be picky with like looks, etc., on top of their career, their money, their education level, like, you're realistically not going to find that many, especially in like the gay community. Like, it is hard to find guys that are hot and educated and have money and etc. Like, I guess even in the straight world too, like, most people are not wealthy. Like, that's just realistically, especially in this country, in this world, like, most people are not wealthy. So like, if you only want someone else that makes like hundreds of thousands of dollars, like, that completely limits your dating pool. And then you have to think about, like, do they have kids? Do they have an ex that's still in the picture? Do they have like this? Do they have that? Like, there's so many other factors. I feel like that's when things just become unrealistic, when your list is purely superficial, especially if you are only going off of like height and weight or even that, etc. If it's very narrow to a point where it's like, these types of guys wouldn't even be attracted to you, then your standards are unrealistic. But it's gonna feel like you need to make like a range of what you're open to and what is not unrealistic. Because like, my ranges are like, I like guys that are like between 5 years older to 5 years younger. I guess ideally my ideal range would be like a 3-year difference, because I like people that are close to my age. But again, it's like, you gotta cast your net wider and then hope you find what your preference is within that net. But if your net is only looking for something, one specific thing, it's gonna be rare that people only fit that little narrow mode. Like, if you're only into people that are like exactly the same age as you, that's gonna be very limiting. If you're only into people that are like a year difference, that's also gonna be very limiting. Like, again, it's like, you need to be open-minded. If you're only into people that like have their own place or have their own car, like, that's gonna be limiting as well. But it's also just kind of like, if that's your preference, then you're gonna realize, like, when you aren't finding anyone, that it's time to expand your horizons and open up your taste level, because no one's matching your criteria. And like, that's when you know it's unrealistic, when you keep ending up alone or can't even find anyone that is what you want. It's time to expand your horizons. And it's not saying like you need to accept anything that you never really normally would accept. I feel like you're completely allowed to have standards, like, but it just has to be realistic. Like, I feel like certain things that are like, you don't want someone that does hard drugs, like, that's perfectly acceptable. Like, I don't think there's anything unrealistic about that, because there's like health and safety involved. Like, if they're doing hard drugs that could kill them, like, it's completely understandable. You don't want to deal with that. If you don't want to date someone that has kids, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it is definitely harder, especially if you are like a straight woman, to like, after a certain age, to find men that don't have kids. But I feel like you do also have to realize, like, once you're at a certain age point, like, most people are gonna have divorces behind them, or someone is gonna have kids behind them. So if you're only looking for people that are like never been married, never had kids, and you're like 40, like, it's gonna be very hard for you to find someone else, even if you have never been married and never had kids. Like, at some point, you're gonna have to open up your horizons and be like, okay, I realize like most people have already had kids and been married at least once, so I'm gonna be open to that. And it doesn't mean like they're gonna be a bad person, but you just have to accept that your preference may be people that don't have baggage of divorces and kids behind them. But the reality is, most people will by a certain age. And I just kind of feel like, if you want a guy that has his own place or drives a nice car, if you don't have that, first of all, that should not be your requirement. And I also just kind of feel like, yeah, if you realize like most people aren't in that situation, or driving like a BMW Mercedes, or even like something along those lines, it's just kind of like, is that really determining how well of a partner someone is, how much they're gonna love you, how much they're gonna be dedicated to you, how much they're gonna build a future with you? Like, you have to really think about like what is important and what is not. Like, especially when it ultimately is, do they love me? Do I love them? Do we want to build a life together and build a future together? That is ultimately what everything boils down to. But of course, other things do matter, like education level. You don't, I can't deal with someone that's stupid. Like, dealing with someone that's an idiot is not fun to date, no matter how attractive they are, no matter how great the sex is. Like, it's just not fun. But like, if I had a requirement where like I would only date guys that also have a college degree, like, that already limits my dating pool significantly, and none of my boyfriends have ever had a degree. So I just realized like, okay, that would be a preference, but honestly, it technically doesn't affect our relationship, especially if they are like working or successful or making money. Like, its degree is not a requirement, and like, it's not a job. Like, this is not a job where you have to have a degree in something to be my future husband, but it's also just like, just have some educational life experience, etc. But yeah, you know when your standards are becoming unrealistic, when you can't find anyone and then no one is matching the criteria. So, thanks, Journey, for this episode of SexxxPerTease.